Welcome to a new episode of Advancing Consciousness series with Franco Di Nicola. This is a place where people can come to gain further insight and clarity as to what is going on and how we can shift things on a personal and global level, while also accessing higher levels of consciousness and awareness. We bring this series to you free of charge so that many are able to access this information. However, if you resonate with what Franco shares and you would like to support his work to get more content out, contributions are welcomed and greatly appreciated. A link is in the description and will be provided in the chat if you feel guided to do so. Also, we have many previous workshops, such as the most recent, bringing out the new you to play in the new world, along with our membership program, Let's Talk About You, where like-minded people come together bi-weekly to talk about the topics requiring deeper understanding and clarity. All of these are available on Teachable, and we encourage you to check them out as they are great resources at very affordable prices to assist in better understanding this human experience. The Teachable link will also be provided in the chat and is also in the description. And lastly, don't forget to share. As more of us come together who are creating shifts in themselves, the more effective it will be to shift things globally. Thank you for joining us and being part of the change. Enjoy today's broadcast.
Okay, welcome everybody to another episode of Advancing Consciousness series. This is the series that assists you in expanding your consciousness. And today we have a really good one to play with because most of us realize that we have different levels of consciousness, but not to the depth that we're going to play with today, because we're going to get a deeper understanding how these levels of consciousness actually works. So this is episode 36, and the topic today is how different levels of consciousness direct our life. And the reason we wanted to play with this today is because there's so much going on within ourselves. Most of the time, we don't realize where all these inputs are coming from and what we're actually dealing with. And in fact, we actually have a choice on what we utilize as part of our experience. And I know I've talked about that, but really now we're going to look at the whole consciousness concept or understanding. It's not even a concept, it's an understanding, going into the depth of looking at how the different stages actually work. So welcome again, and looking forward to play together. I also like to thank everybody for participating and co-creating and supporting us through this journey as we're going through all the different stages. I know this in some areas, depending where you are, it's summertime and not as many people would like to make the time at this time to participate, but the recordings are available for you, so that's the great part of it. It's of course it's on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and what's the other one? LinkedIn and so forth. And we have it available for you at any time. So let's play with this whole idea of consciousness. Now, when I say there's different levels of consciousness, there are actually different, how can I say it? Not only different levels, but there are also different compartmental sources of consciousness that we can access. So let's take a look at it. We have what we call an overall consciousness. It's double L, right? So we have an overall consciousness. We have a subconsciousness. I don't think this marker is doing so well here, so let's switch it up. Switch it up. Subconsciousness. Okay. I don't think I have enough room. I'm going to have to do it in. So we have subconsciousness. We also have what we call the superconsciousness. I've talked about this for a long time, and nobody really understood what this whole idea of superconsciousness was. But it has caught on now much more because this is being referred to much more than before. We also have what we can call a body consciousness. You know something, I'm just going to have to shorten this. So we have a body consciousness. Now, I know sometimes you can find it very difficult to understand that the body actually has a consciousness too, and it's very powerful. So we also have the human entity consciousness. Of course, now we also have what we can call collective consciousness. Now, this is very interesting because the collective consciousness has many, many departments or compartments, if you want to call it that. Because we do have what we can call the collective consciousness, but we also have sub-collective consciousness. So we have the collective consciousness. We also have what we call soul family consciousness. I'll write the two versions of it. And it's also known as oversoul. And I'm going to go through all of these so you understand what we're talking about. And then I'll break down the collective consciousness part. But we have one that's very interesting. We call the ego. That's a consciousness in itself. Now, even though it is kind of wired up in a certain interesting way, that it actually carries a consciousness. Now, when we're talking about that, we also have what we can call a planetary. And there's more to that, and I'm going to cover that, planetary consciousness, because there's sub-consciousness around that. And believe it or not, all of these different levels of consciousness actually play a role in your life stream. So let's put a divider there and so forth. So when we look at it, we say, okay, well, we got an ego consciousness and it has its own operating system and how it looks at things and so forth. We have an overall consciousness that is really what we call consciousness, being conscious. But there's different levels of that conscious, but that conscious is actually combining all of it together. We have what we call the subconscious, which is basically all the stored information, memories, labels, definitions, and so forth. And it also supports and actually stores all of your experiences. What we call the superconscious, that is your soul and higher self. So we can put on there soul and higher self. Now, that has parts to it too. So when we're talking about the superconscious, let's just take an arrow down here. The superconscious also has access to, say, your twin soul consciousness. Of course, it goes into this what we call the soul family, but it is kind of separate. So I'm going to explain that part of it too. So it has that access also. The next part is the soul family, and this is also considered the oversoul consciousness. And all of these differ in some way or another. What we're talking about is the planetary consciousness. That is the consciousness that Gaia shares us, and also what Gaia shares us through life. So in this case, the planetary also have what we also consider sentient beings and so forth, plants and so forth, plants, animals, really everything that's on the planet. Each part has experiences. Each part has a consciousness that it shares. And what is consciousness itself? It's really an operating system. It's how can I put it? In a sense, it's an awareness that it is experientially rich. So when we're talking about the planetary consciousness is made up of all different beings that have been on the planet. Now, it doesn't only refer to us as us being the only beings that have been on the planet, meaning that the 15,000 years ago when planet Earth was retooled, that we were reseeded, the planet was reseeded with the animal kingdom, the plant life, and also the insects, the birds, and the oceanic kingdom, and reptile kingdoms, and so forth. All of that was actually reseeded in a different operating system with a different frequency. However, the planetary consciousness, the Gaia consciousness itself, actually goes back to its original design, which goes back billions of years. So it has a lot of history and experience that it provides. Now, of course, not all of it is available very easily because of the fact that it keeps itself current. So it's learning from its experience. Now, the planetary consciousness is actually quite interesting because it also takes information and experiences and so forth from plants, and it takes it from the animal kingdoms and all the other kingdoms, and it just keeps this kind of a big hard drive of sense of consciousness and awareness of how it operates and everything else that's going on. But it doesn't even stop there. The beauty of it, that the planetary consciousness also has what we call a solar system consciousness. And the solar system consciousness, at this point in time, is that all the planets in our solar system, starting from the sun all the way through to Pluto and all the planets itself, all are sharing a pool of consciousness, a pool of experientially rich potentialities, opportunities, and experiences that either have been played out or are being staged to be played out, but we also have access to other levels which we also can refer to as simulations. So all of that is available from a planetary consciousness. Now, there's one extra bonus to that. When we're talking about the planetary consciousness, it also has a link to what we call the sun. Our sun. What happens with the sun? The sun itself takes light codes, information, and consciousness from our galaxy. So basically, this whole alignment that we experience where, the sun is actually a direct alignment with what we call the galactic sun, it actually takes in consciousness. So we have the sun consciousness, which also creates codes and so forth. So we have the sun's consciousness, which is really a galactic consciousness and a universal consciousness. Now, what it does, it provides us the opportunity to also have an enrichment of awareness and understanding and potential experiences from all the planets that are in our galaxy. Now, of course, we will have access to certain streams of it. And that level of streaming that we're talking about at this point in time will depend on the quadrant that we're in, because planet Earth is kind of a hub. So here is planet Earth, and spinning from all of that, there's all these other planets, or what we can call solar systems, and there's 400 of them that are connected to it. Now, when I say connected, it doesn't mean everything has to go through that hub. However, we have access to that. And of course, there are different beings on different planets having different experiences and different opportunities that experience. But, what's the beauty of it? You have to understand, when it comes to the soul itself, the soul can reincarnate in any of these planets and even sometimes in different universes. So your soul, a particular soul, let's take that, as a particular soul could have reincarnated on different planets but also incarnated on planet Earth and brought some of the experiences of planet Earth onto those other planets, and specifically those frequencies, and specifically when we talk about heavy-duty polarization part. So that also becomes part of what is shared within what we can call a certain level of awareness and consciousness. So we have what we of course we're talking about is the sun consciousness, and by tapping into that, we're also getting the galaxy consciousness and the solar system consciousness. Now, of course, planet Earth has aligned at a certain point where we got direct rays and frequencies and spectrums of light right from the galactic central sun. What is the galactic central sun? It's basically a kind of a focal point energetic beam of light, if you want to call it that, that radiates throughout the galaxy. And whenever we're aligning, we're getting that directly, but it's made up of all the different solar systems in our galaxy. So these solar systems are creating this really finite directed energy that comes to that really supports all the planets within the galaxy, but whenever we align to it, we actually get a direct hit. Now, of course, there was so much put in place so that we would not get a direct hit until just recently, so some years ago, around 2012, because of the fact that, you know, we were quarantined and we were making arrangements so that we would go through certain processes before that was introduced. So now it has been introduced for some 8+ years. So we're looking at, or maybe a little less, about 8 years. So what we're looking at right now is that. Now, there's one more level of consciousness that we haven't addressed, and then we're going to look at some of what we call the collective consciousness. So the next part of it is our sun, our planet. This is Earth. So we're going to say Earth. But in the center of the planet, on the inside, we have another sun. It's a crystal, and it carries a certain frequency. And within there are civilizations that are very skilled in the fifth dimensional consciousness. So that has been made available for us much more, specifically in the last couple of years, but this year it's been more. So we're also receiving that energy, that light coming through the planet itself. So if you haven't heard of it, the planet itself has the surface dwellers and the internal dwellers. Now, we have more of a yellowish, whitish sun, and the inner, which is a powerful crystal that is also energetic, that actually plays as a sun and carries a powerful consciousness, actually has a little bit more of a blue hue. And that is also for the civilization. So really, the planet itself is some 800, or I think it's 800-mile core, and really the core of the planet itself is really in the middle, about 400 feet down below our what we call the surface, and then there's another 400 feet after that that goes into the inner planet, inner Earth they call it. And of course we have openings in both of the poles. We have some other openings in other places underneath the water and so forth, and there are ships that go in and out fairly frequently. These are brother-sister souls that are working. Now, that is also part of the human extension, but those have stayed within that inner planet, only coming to the surface time to time, because we have still got to go through our purging of our polarized state. Because again, we have to understand, we were playing with the inverted matrix, we were playing with inverted 3D and 2D, we had accentuated polarization, accentuated warlike mentality, where, within that separation, we were destroying everything pretty well, because in essence, and that vibration, that frequency was not very conducive for a fifth dimensional conscious being that has already been matured in a fifth dimensional consciousness physical form. So that will come into light more often as we move forward. Now, that's been talked about for a long time. Now, some of those beings are Lemurian and Atlantean origins, and they've gone through the refining process, because both the Lemurians and Atlanteans at different times had gone through an expanded consciousness, but then they got lost in the what we call the inverted matrix, or what we can call the Lucifer operating system, and all the control structures that was there. Now, collective consciousness, what's that made up of? Collective consciousness is basically all the consciousness that is as a huge database from everyone that's ever experienced a human form and every level of consciousness that's there. Now, this is the most current collective consciousness. What do I mean by that? The collective consciousness itself is from this series of experience, meaning these bodies, all the sentient beings that are on the planet, everything that exists in the last 15,000 years. So we got 15,000 years of collective, so we'll put 15K years of collective consciousness. Now, of course, a lot of this consciousness is not so easily available because at certain points it became obsolete, some of the information, but it's still available as necessary, but most of it is not. It more deals with the most current. So we have what we call the collective consciousness, which a lot of times we refer to the collective. Now, as we go through the experience, we're also feeding that collective. Now, the collective consciousness does not stop only there, because there's even more to that. There is cluster consciousness. So, cluster consciousness. Now, the cluster consciousness, sorry about all of this. I should be a little bit more neat, but I'm not. Okay. What the cluster consciousness is part of the collective consciousness. But what is a cluster consciousness? Cluster consciousness is, in fact, pockets of consciousness that are created by people coming together. So let me give you an example. A cluster consciousness would be a religious organization. Now, within that what we call religious organization, there's sub. Okay, so you say, okay, we'll take as an example the Catholic religion. So that, as long as you're tuning into that and you're connecting with that, even with faith or whatever it is, and you give power to it, now you're tapping to one of the collective, what we call cluster consciousness, which is the religious that. But then there's sub to that. And what are the subs? The subs are basically depending on where you are. Now, the religious operating system for, say, Catholic at this point in time has some variance in different parts of the world. Now, it's still part of that cluster consciousness, but there are smaller parts that have a little bit of a difference. So that means that if you're having an experience of going from North America and you go to another country and experience what we call the Catholic religion, you're now going to notice that there's some differences. Sometimes it's subtle, sometimes it's a little bit more pronounced differences, because they've created what we call sub-clusters within the Catholic religion. Now, these clusters are not just only religion, there are many, many different clusters. We also create clusters within our community, clusters in our family dynamics, and this is one of the things that when we're tapping into those cluster consciousness, you can access the consciousness that is being created and hosted within the family dynamics. We can have subconsciousness or cluster consciousness in working environments with friendships and so forth, but we're talking about neighborhoods and provinces and states and countries and so forth. You were going to say something.
Yeah, Brenda's asking, are orbs beings that of cluster consciousness? You know, the orbs you see?
Yes.
Are they cluster consciousness?
Yes. So the orbs also carry a cluster consciousness. Now, a lot of times the orbs are not exact consciousness that was stimulated or created on planet Earth. A lot of them may be cluster consciousness that come in to observe, to learn. Now, some of the cluster consciousness in orbs may create a very so-called low frequency or create or stimulate something that is not always great. So just the fact that you have orbs does not mean it's always high vibration. You can also bring lower vibration orbs too. depending on it. And now a lot of the orbs are these clusters that are also created on planet Earth, in a sense, when there are certain groups. So you may be having a religious, organizational, ritual, or whatever you want to call it, and then what happens is you're tapping into that consciousness. Now, the cluster consciousness has some other beauties laid into it. I know this may be going in. The fact is, if you get a group of people that have a certain belief of some sort, they buy into a certain belief, or do agree or adopt a certain belief, you also create another cluster consciousness. So if there's a strong belief that there is a devil, for example, just as an example, then a cluster consciousness of that comes to play. But it doesn't even stop there. Then there are entities that love those cluster energies because it supports them in that state. Even a religious have many, many entities that are drawn to that are not embodied, are disembodied, or don't have a physicality, but can, time to time, attach to different individuals for different times, as long as they're tapping into those cluster consciousness. So if we believe strongly that we are going to dance a certain way and bring rain, of course, what are you going to do? You're going to access that cluster consciousness, and it kind of shapes the way that we experience that particular area, and then rain may show up, or a version of that will show up. I mean, that gets a little deep into covering how that all works, but just so that you understand how that all is shaped. Now, all of these are influenced by not only our personal experiences, but what energy we put into the experience and what those clusters are actually doing, or the different parts. So, when we're talking about the overall, I'm missing an S here, the overall consciousness, does that have one L, two L? Yeah, okay. Somehow it looks weird to me. Okay, so when we're talking about the overall consciousness, what is that? That is our mind, okay? And our mind creates a consciousness. What is it made up of? It's made up of experiences. It's made up of observation. It's made up of programs, stories, belief systems, and so forth. So your consciousness says this is how things work, and you now operate within that belief system, or that story, or that idea, okay? So your overall consciousness is, this is who I am, and this is how I function, this is what I do, and so forth. Now, this is shaped by so many different levels. Whoa, words don't come out here. So this overall consciousness is very easily influenced. So what the ego says or projects definitely influences the overall consciousness. This is your operating system. Your subconscious plays a role too. And of course, the subconscious is utilized by the ego big time. So it goes back and forth. It also is influenced by your superconscious. And your superconscious is your soul, your higher self. It's influenced by your planetary consciousness, which is a whole slew of things. It's influenced by your soul family, oversoul consciousness, of course your twin soul, and then it also has the input of the sun's consciousness, and then what we are also receiving from the earth consciousness. So this is the overall operating system. That's what we actually operate from. When we're talking about the mind, when we're talking about that part of our computing capacities, it is influenced by that level of consciousness. This is why we experience different levels of consciousness. The reason we make new choices when we get different awareness and when we start to look at things very differently. Now, so this is very flexible, and it can change. It can go up and down. What I mean by up and down, it can go up in a sense where it accesses higher consciousness. It takes more influence from different parts of that. And then at times it'll lower and take influence more of the ego. Now, So that's very flexible. Your subconscious mind is really a powerful tool. It's actually a memory bank. And what it does when we're talking about the subconscious mind, it actually records every experience you have from the moment you were born till now. So it records every single experience, but it also records the experience and labels it. Labels it what it means, what it conceived as the idea, which is of course coming from different sources that pinpoint that label. A lot of times it's the ego. It's not only the label, it's also a definition, what that experiences should be like. Now, in the subconscious mind, you have those memories, you have those labels, and they can influence your consciousness of what choices you make, what actions you take, how you feel, and how you respond. However, it doesn't have the same level of impact as we may think. If there's a belief system in the subconscious mind that you do not deserve a better life, okay, each time you're starting to create some experience, and there's the overall consciousness that is tapping into the subconscious mind that you do not deserve to have a better life, I'm just giving you as an example, then this becomes influential. Now, in this, it's because you have labels that say you do not deserve it. Now, of course, all of it is made up, but how did it get there? How did the labels actually get there? Because the subconscious mind does not label anything. It stores the information as an archive, as a reference point of how to have your experiences. The labels come from your ego. We got to get a better marker here.
Someone's just asking.
Yes.
Is the a subconscious house the living library, a cache?
It is a more localized cache, yes, for your own personal experience. I'm going to get rid of this one. So it will have more of what we call your personal experience of this lifetime. Okay, so everything from the moment you were born to now. So you can call it a cache, but it's a current cache. It's this lifetime. Of course, you have another level of a cache, which we're now going into the soul level, superconscious levels, where you're recording more of your experiences, because the superconscious also records multiple lives that you've had. Of course, the human entity does that too, which we'll talk about shortly. But so you will, in here, like I was saying, it has experiences and observations, and also records the feelings and what it may have felt for you, what you may have experienced, and so forth. But those labels and definitions were applied by the ego mind, or what we call ego consciousness, that software. The whole idea of what's good, what's bad, what's right, what's wrong, what to love, what not to love, or to hate, or what to experience, and the whole idea of separation and so forth is all dictated from the ego, artificial intelligence, and so forth, that when we have an experience, it labels it, and now when the subconscious records the experience, it has the label attached to it. The label is basically what the determination, what the ego has labeled or judged or compared or labeled as an experience that was one of those polarities and so forth. So that's what the subconscious mind has. So the subconscious mind has an impact on your experience, but it really doesn't have the same level of impact that we may think, because realistically this is information and labels which we will tap, and the conscious mind will bring into its experience and try to utilize it. But it doesn't have the same effect because there's so many other streaming that the overall consciousness is getting, that it does not have the same impact that we may think. Where the impact comes in is when the ego mind goes in there. Because what the ego mind does, it actually creates stories on top of stories and gives examples. So it's now taking archived information from the subconscious mind and create a whole dramatic story. Not only taking the label of what happened to you. For example, you had something traumatic happen to you, and it was labeled as traumatic. Because realistically, the subconscious mind sees an experience as what it is. An experience is an opportunity to experience something. Now, of course, sometimes the labeling comes from the body because the body say, hey, wait a minute here, that doesn't feel so good, or it feels too intense. But it really doesn't say, oh, it's a bad thing, it's intense. The ego says, no, that's a bad thing, because it's also tapping into what we can call the collective consciousness, where so many have said, that's a bad experience, that, something else. This is why different people will have different association through a similar experience, because it depends on what the ego uses and what the subconscious mind has there, how much is access from the collective consciousness. So this level of consciousness is your operating system constantly. So it's the ongoing thing. This is how you make your decisions and so forth. But then all of this other part plays a lot of resources. When we get to the superconscious mind, which now you're tapping into the heart, that is now you're tapping into the superconscious, which has a lot of all of this other stuff attached to it. Basically, it has the soul family, the oversoul consciousness, and the twin soul consciousness, and so forth, all interconnected into there. And before we even go to the planetary, or what we can call the body consciousness. Go ahead.
Annie's asking, when one's physical body dies, where does the ego consciousness go? Does it die with it?
Yes. Well, the what we can call the localized operating system stops working. Now, it does leave an imprint. And when I say an imprint, there's several imprints that it leaves. First of all, because of your own personal experience, the ego doesn't work alone. There is a consciousness, what we call ego cluster consciousness, or collective ego consciousness. So, from a collective viewpoint, whatever you've experienced and whatever stories it's made and whatever it utilizes, it keeps it as a hard drive. Now, of course, a lot of that is breaking down now because of the fact that it's not being supported. However, it still plays. When it comes to the influence, now you have to understand, if the ego has been playing overall in a very powerful way, your overall consciousness also ceases to exist in a sense. Okay? However, even with the subconscious mind, it ceases to exist. These archives are all current while you're in a physical body. However, all of this will be also imprinted into your subconscious, your superconscious mind, and it's also going into your human entity conscious mind or consciousness. So a human entity that we take on as part of our experience has a lot of different experiences and a lot of different encodements that has adopted or utilized while it was in different bodies with different levels of what we call ego and so forth. Now there's two parts to that. There's more than two parts actually. The human entity consciousness evolves, expands by each and every individual that takes on a physical form, because it's connected, first of all, it has an ego. Of course, it's connected to a different, what we call a superconsciousness or a soul, a different soul. So there's a streaming from the soul with all of this, the soul family, oversoul type of thing. There's also information that comes in from how it interprets the different source points. So this becomes upgraded, constantly upgraded. And it's also taking information from what we call the overall consciousness and the superconscious. It basically looks at the whole thing, everything that's observed, and it's recording it. So it's evolving according to that. So is the superconscious, which is your soul, is also learning from that. Now, the only difference is your human entity consciousness becomes enriched in having the human experience. Now, so the human entity is actually a lot more skilled in how to have the human experience overall than what we would call the superconscious. Because the superconscious may have been on the planet before, maybe once, twice, 10 times, it doesn't matter, or never. But it has had other embodiments on different planets, in different physical forms, in different encodements, and so forth. So it's bringing a lot of that into play. So even an experience as a human, that's also going into there. It's also assisting the soul family, the oversoul, basically soul family in one. This is all one, basically. Consciousness, and it's also assisting the twin soul. Now, that experience is also feeding into the consciousness of the planet. and the plant life and the animals. Now, these are evolving independently, but also takes in input. So you're also getting feedback that shapes all of that at this point in time. So the body consciousness, when we're talking about the body consciousness here, the body consciousness is an innate consciousness of how it is to be in a body. Now, that has the original blueprint, the 15,000 year ago blueprint. It also has the blueprint that was superimposed on top of that when the inverted matrix and the inverted operating system was put into place. Now, the body consciousness, of course, also is very skilled in communicating with the planetary consciousness because it is an extension of the planetary consciousness. It also communicates with all of that. The body consciousness is closer to nature too. This is why the body flourishes when it's around nature, because there's a coherent frequency that is established with the body. So it's very supportive when you're exposed to nature and the animal kingdom, but also by connecting with Gaia. Now, you're never totally disconnected by Gaia, but we can create buffers of isolation. And then, if we put ourselves in the concrete jungle, we call the cities and so forth, then you can get disconnected from that. So the only resources you have is from other individuals going through their experience, and you have less input from that because you're disconnecting from it or not allowing it to be coming through as clearly. So you have to understand that all of this here, what it's doing is that it shapes your overall consciousness, which basically directs your life. Now, because of the amount of input that's coming in from the collective, from the human entity, body consciousness, and so forth, of course, the ego, and what we call the different clusters coming in and so forth, that this creates a mismatch, not a mix match? Mix match. I don't know. Anyway, it's a blend, a poopery, or whatever they call it.
Oh, okay.
Yes. So it's a blend. So especially with everything that's going on right now, those different inputs that are coming in are creating a bit of an imbalance, which has a perfection in it in any ways. So when we're tapping into our heart, our soul, we're going more direct to the superconscious mind, and you're kind of creating a more direct stream. And when I say direct stream, without you kind of isolate more of the other inputs, and you're now starting to shape your life accordingly. So the superconscious becomes because you have to understand the superconscious has also what it calls it's your purpose or whatever directional experience is about, but it also brings in consciousness from other different levels that are available that come from different resources. Now, when we're talking about the sun consciousness, and we'll get into it a little deeper with the other stuff, when we're talking about the sun consciousness, by us connecting with the sun, meaning exposing our body, our eyes to the sun, and I'm not saying staring at the sun, I'm saying just the reflection from everything as it reflects, because you have to understand, when it reflects on Gaia, when it reflects on plant life, and when we're getting it direct, those are all encodements. Let me explain how that works. So if you're being exposed to the sun directly, your body has receptors that take that sun in, the light codes, the spectrum of frequency, the vibrations that it carries, and the consciousness that it carries that is being upgraded over time and much more upgraded in the last while, so that it actually facilitates in creating a shift in ourselves. So it's changing and upgrading our body consciousness, but also our body's operating system, and it's also advancing our overall consciousness. So that the exposure of the sun to ourselves is actually a powerful contributor to our transformation. Now, the other thing, it's not only just the direct sun, is when the sun hits nature, plant life, and everything else that's on what we call the plant life. And it also, natural clouds and whatever else is there, how it reflects on the water if you're near water and so forth. That actually takes, as the sun hits those areas, it actually fine-tunes that spectrum of light and also upgrades the consciousness to a degree that's more reflective of the body of the water, of the plant life, and also what we call Gaia. So, it's not just exposing yourself just directly to the sun, which is huge in a very powerful way, but also to be around nature. Now, the other thing is, when nature receives light, it actually also transmits a very powerful frequency that is very nurturing to support us. So when you're in nature, the reason that you're receiving a lot of the energy and the different codes and the different grounding levels from plant life and Gaia itself is because you're also receiving the energy from Gaia, and you're also receiving the, I don't like the word interpretation, but the way it actually shapes and accesses the spectrums of light from the sun. So it gives a very specific, and it's very balanced. This is the reason that when you're in nature, it's very calming. You also notice that you feel more connected, especially if you just pay attention and be there rather than having your mind wandering and you're just trying to get from A to B. Because this is what happens to a lot of people. They go for a walk in nature and it's like, let me get through this walk. Right, instead of just enjoying and walking slowly, because then we're not going to be distracting or filterizing, and that's a word I made up, filterizing or filtering those, what the energies are coming through, and also the spectrums of light that come through. So all of that is participating at this point in time. So the sun plays a very powerful role. The sun has actually been playing a very powerful role to upgrade the human experience, to upgrade Gaia, to upgrade a lot of it, and also to negate the effectiveness of the ego. The ego does not like the light so much because it's very high vibration. So the ego will have a tendency to go in a tantrum. However, if you expose yourself more to it, it does calm it down, because in fact it actually modifies, or in this case negates, a lot of its operating system, and it cannot operate the same way. So if you notice, the more time you spend in nature, more time that you spend in the sun, you'll notice the ego influence and the impact it has, or even the amount of dialogue decreases. Now, especially because the ego is not reinforced and supported, because the only thing the ego has access to now is not only information that is stored in the subconscious mind, but it's other egos. So ego has to support ego, because it's not getting a direct stream from the moon anymore. It's not, the inverted matrix is no longer in place. The planet is not supporting inverted 3D and 2D anymore. It is basically only supporting organic 3D and organic 5D. However, it can exist because we're still feeling it. So the ego itself is not getting all that reinforcement. So as you expose yourself to sun, as you expose yourself more to your superconsciousness by connecting to your heart more, it actually negates and minimizes the impact it has over your overall consciousness, which actually is the main director of your life. Now, all of this is not only directing your life personally, it's also directing the life of other people you engage with and everybody on the planet, including every sentient being that exists, including Gaia. So all of it is being affected, or in this case, somehow influenced. So the more we connect with this, our energy changes, our consciousness upgrades, and so forth. And what we transmit, what we support, it doesn't matter if there's 1,000 egos saying one thing, but you're outside of that because you're hosting a higher consciousness. What happens? It negates most of that, because those vibration frequencies are much higher, and that level of awareness also is more preferred. So this is the thing, is the energy coming from the sun, from your superconscious, from the planetary part of it, is preferred by the human entity, is preferred by the overall consciousness, it's very much preferred by the body consciousness. So it's not so, the more, because of its preference, because of the focus it puts on, it discounts more and more of the ego, and the ego has less and less of a grip, and eventually starts to shut down more and more and becomes less and less influential until it no longer functions, because it's no longer supporting. Now, if we're still playing a lot of the old 3D games, inverted 3D games and 2D games, and still giving power to the old operating systems, then the ego has something to play with, because as your vibration's low, if you're going to have an emotional charge of some sort, it gives a little bit more support to the ego, because the ego loves operating in the lower frequency. And as I've said before, the ego really can only operate what we call in the past and the future. And the reason it does that is because when it's tapping into the past, it's tapping into the subconscious mind. The subconscious mind has a lot of labels and a lot of different held in frequencies of those experiences, and this is why it takes that, because it can relate and use with that material better than our current material. Now, because it has access to that, it likes to project in the future. So it keeps us focusing on the future, but with the reference of the past, which is again from your subconscious mind. So if you feel that in one way or another that you're non-deserving from a previous labeled and defined experience, then it's going to focus and remind you over and over again and create tremendous amount of scenarios to reinforce that, and then project it forward that no one really wants to be with you because you do not deserve it, and so forth. So it's going to present that, because the moment you become in the moment, your ego doesn't have access, because in the moment it's not tapping into the subconscious mind. It can't. It becomes a barrier. In the moment, you're just present. And in that moment, you're basically where you are at that moment. Where you are energetically, where you are as an observer point, but you're also getting a lot more input from it. Now, in the moment, yes, you can still receive, collective consciousness stuff coming in, but at the same time, in the moment, you're basically focused there. And your intent is to be in the moment from a superconscious level. So when you're tapping into that, you're also tapping in the moment of your human entity, because your human entity is constantly evolving, constantly advancing. And the human entity does not like to put a lot of focus on the past or lower frequency. That has changed a long time ago. Back in 30 plus years ago that changed, 33 I think now. But that changed where the focus of the human entity is not to look at the past. Now, of course, it brought up a lot of the past stuff because it wanted to purge it, wrap it up, and whatever it is. But that's not its reference point. So its reference point is actually using the most current, what we can call the current level of understanding, consciousness, awareness, and observation. So when you're looking at that, it prefers to look in the moment, because then, as you're in the moment, you're actually now accessing what we can call the collective human entity consciousness. Now, of course, that has a specific, each human entity has a specific signature also, and that signature gives you a certain spectrum for you to utilize, but that signature is not locked. That's the beauty of it. It's also able to access much more consciousness depending on how quickly you get what you need to get done within your own particular experience. So, and the body consciousness, of course, loves to be in the most current also, because the body itself is evolving. Because the body, again, like I said, is a reflection of planet Earth and what we call Gaia. And that consciousness is always expanding, 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 and the body consciousness is expanding. Now, of course, the body is bombarded with a lot of different codes through the food we take. Now, you have to understand, the reason that we have 90+% of what we call or have labeled with the concept and ideas food in a grocery store that is far from being food, with a host of different chemicals and different frequencies and mutations and genetically modified and sustenance, is to actually supersede the encodement of the what we call the innate consciousness of the body and kind of stifle it in a way, because the body consciousness is very powerful when left in its original operating state with all these other inputs coming in, because it allows to use the most latest level of experiencing itself in a body. But it also, because the body consciousness is easily adaptable, it adapts to its environment, it adapts to its exposures. Now, if we keep bombarding it and dumping a tremendous amount of junk codes that actually create more what we can call imbalances of non-functionality or shutting down certain parts of its operating system, then of course you're going to experience what we call illness and experience a lot of different other things that play out for us. And then of course the frequencies that are coming in from the different cellular and Wi-Fi's and all of that stuff affect the body consciousness. It also affects the overall consciousness, the processing aspect of that. And of course the egos love it because it actually gives it a little bit more in to the experience, where it can, take over, play a little more deeply in that experience. So that gives us kind of a base of what this level of consciousness. So what's happening right now? What are we doing? What we're doing is we're creating a shift. The shift is within ourselves. So what are we shifting? We're shifting, the main thing that we're shifting here is your overall consciousness. We're shifting that because this shapes and directs your life. Shapes and directs your life. Because this is what is current. That's what it's using all the time. The subconscious stuff, it will take only bits and pieces of the experience. So you can still have a memory of whatever played out with you as a child, but what you're doing is it actually starts to dissolve the labels. This is why we're going through a lot of purging right now. What are we purging? We're purging the labels, the definitions, and a lot of the memories. For example, a movie's a movie. Unless we say what that movie represents, what that means, how it operates, or what influence it has, a movie's just a movie. It's like any experience. So it's also being purged because we're purging the meanings and definitions accordingly. So that's part of the changes that are coming into place. So the overall consciousness is not influenced so much on the labels. And of course, the other part is the ego shutting down. The ego's becoming less and less active. We're deactivating it. So part of the shifting right now is also allowing the body's innate consciousness to flourish. So it adapts more freely, because most of the adapting and adopting, or whatever you want to call it, that the body can handle, what we call the innate consciousness of the body, has had a tremendous amount of interference from different encodements of what we've been exposed to, so that it actually can't really function. So these newer, higher frequencies that are coming through right now is stimulating the transformation from its current state to its original design state. And what do I mean by that? Crystalline state. So we went from crystalline to silicate to carbon, and now we're reversing the process. Crystalline, what it means is a crystal, it carries much more information, much more consciousness, and much more clear with the innate consciousness and its operating system. So it's not only more adaptable, but it's a much more powerful contributor of creating a very powerful experience in a body. So that is happening right now. So the body's going through a transformation where it's shifting its way that it carries light codes and its operating system, and re-stimulating its blueprint with the upgrades, because we're exposing ourselves to various upgrades. Now, with that, the body plays a huge role of how we feel our experience, how we connect sensorially with all that's playing out. because it's a natural state. It learned from its experience. See, the body consciousness is very much connected with Gaia, so it will communicate much more clearly with Gaia and what it has to offer and the consciousness it has to offer and how we can relate with Gaia. The same thing with what we can call the full planetary consciousness with plants, animals, and so forth, which was our original design in the first place, that we had that powerful connection before, which we've kind of have experienced. So that's what the body is doing. It's going to be taking more of those inputs and less of the encodements that are going through. Now, some of the changes that are going on is that we're exposing a lot of different things that have been played out, that were also instigated when sort of an elite group of hybrids were put in place, then the inverted matrix was in place, and then the inverted 3D and then 2D was put in place. We're kind of reversing all of that process so that the body is not going to be exposed. So a lot of the chemicals and all the other stuff that's been, put into our playground and their influence, first of all, some of it will not have the same influence, even though it may remain to some degree. But at the same time, a lot of those influences will stop being utilized because the overall consciousness and awareness of oneness and how we experience becomes more into play. So that's what the body is doing. The human entity consciousness, of course, is also going through an upgrade, because what the body's experiencing, what all of these other resources are coming in, it's actually refining itself. See, the human entity itself is basically kind of another soul, but it is earthbound. Now, eventually it won't be earthbound when this particular series of physicalities are no longer in operation, and if it's retooled, sometime down the road, if it's retooled, then another human entity will be created, or another species of entity will be created to match the human experience. Now, where this comes into play is that every human that's had an experience goes into this consciousness. So what we call the human entity consciousness. So there's a collective human entity consciousness, with each human entity having a very specific encodement, and that's where the blend comes in, because the human entity blends or connects with a particular body that connects with a particular soul family and so forth, and then starts to shape what we call an overall consciousness. Of course, when we were there before, these things used to get plugged in. The ego consciousness, that was an implant of 10,000 years ago, wasn't there originally. It's just an operating system. I know a lot of people say, well, without the ego, then we won't know who we are. Well, what is the ego going to say? You are such and such. It's very limited what it says you are. But without the ego, you may not have a label saying I'm just this and that. You're basically source. You're basically the essence of all existence, but you're having a human experience, and through that human experience, you create an open platform. You're no longer labeling yourself or categorizing yourself as this or that, which at one point in time created a very interesting experience, and which we're kind of unraveling ourselves from. So that's what we're doing at this point. So the human entity, again, is always constantly wanting to expand and really bring in new experiences. So right now, what's happening is the human entity is going through an upgrade too, with all these frequencies, light codes, and everything else that's going in. So what is it doing? What's the human entity doing? It actually categorizes the different frequencies of experiences. And it's starting to negate a lot of the older vibrational experiences, the destructive experiences, where we killed each other, where we, took advantage of each other, where we were in survival, because the human entity consciousness has a lot of imprint around survival, fight and flight and separation and feeling unsafe and all of that stuff. Now, even though the unsafe is kind of superficial when it comes to the human entity, because it knows it's immortal also, and it doesn't go with the body, but at the same time, when it's going through all of that, so it's been kind of segmenting and separating, okay, this is from the old experience, and now we're only going to tap into the newer experience. So each and every one of us that has an aha, or comes to a further realization, or has a different upgraded experience in our human body, it's upgrading the collective human entity, which is also available for all the individualized, signature-based human entity. So that means the collective experience, now that it's focusing on the higher frequency, becomes encoded and becomes available to your human entity, to our human entity, to all of us, really. So our human entity at this point in time will get all those newer level, not supposed to be there, levels of realizations and experience. But what is that realization made up of? What it feels like to be in a human body using certain skill sets. Now, the other thing too is, I'm going to fix this. I have to apologize. Sometimes my brain doesn't work so well. Consciousness. Okay, so what's happening with the human entity here, as it's going through those transformations, is that it's streaming all of this additional awareness. So you have access to a different awareness on the human experience. But also the skill sets. That means its capacities and capabilities are also evolving. So you may have had certain skill sets that were more tuned for different overall cluster consciousness or consciousness that we may have had. What does that mean? If we look back 5,000 years ago, okay, the human entity had whatever the ongoing experience of was 5,000 years ago, even though the inverted matrix was involved and so forth. So it created certain skill sets and expanded certain skill sets to match with what the environment was at that point. So now, here we are, 15,000 years later, and we're going through this powerful evolutionary experience and changes. It's actually now kind of compartmentalized and looking at the more focused levels of consciousness and awareness of what it represents to be a human body and a human experience. Now, the human entity is constantly learning and also feeding back to source, of course, as every other part of us. As for the superconscious, of course, it's also going through a transformation because it's accessing higher levels of consciousness. Now, none of this is stagnant. So, because it's connected to, okay, so your superconscious is basically bringing experiences from each and every incarnation from any level of planetary experience. So basically, we're talking about the soul, higher self. Remind me the percentage of what we're focusing on as our new creation. So when we're talking about the soul itself, it has its higher consciousness. So now it's able to use more of its consciousness, of what it's brought in from different realms, different degrees of consciousness, and also different playgrounds and within different physicalities. So now it's saying, okay, I can use more of those experiences. Yes, I'm going to have to modify it slightly to match what the human condition could handle, but I'm expanding it. So it's using a higher level of consciousness. So it may have come in as a 10th dimensional consciousness being, as a soul, but it couldn't use that. It had to use a much lower one because it had to take on a human physical form, and the playground would not support the higher ones at that point. So now it's accessing more of that. The other thing that changed is also, you have to understand that the superconscious is also constantly getting soul family, or we call oversoul consciousness feed, and the twin soul. So what does that all do? Well, you have to understand your soul family may be possibly incarnated on planet Earth, having a completely different experience, coming in from a different dimensional consciousness. But the majority of the time, they're on other planets, or they're in non-form, supporting the collective, or what we call the oversoul, or what we call the soul family, the cluster. That's why the cluster, the core, is the oversoul. How does the oversoul work? Is that each and every soul, there's 24 souls that are connected. It's actually 12 signatures, 12 different signatures of souls, but each soul has a duplicate of its signature, so there's really 24 inputs. So you're tapping into that, but they're on different planets, having different levels of experiences and consciousness. So we're now tapping into more and more of what it has as an offering of different experiences, really, at that point in time. And also, your twin soul could be on the planet. It's a small percentage that it's the case, even though it has increased dramatically over the last 10 or so years. However, the twin soul can be anywhere, and it can be a non-form or form. So that has a direct signature, so it's actually sharing.
Franco,
but now
does everybody have a twin soul?
Yes.
Or twin flame, same thing, right?
Yeah, twin soul, twin flame is all the same. Yes, and yes, everybody does. Now, there's occasions that those two souls merge. So what is also called as more of a unified soul. And when we're talking about unified soul, that's only the first level of unification. Now, usually the twin soul will have, or say your soul, a particular soul, I'm not talking yours, but any particular soul, can leave the body. And the way it was done before is that the soul, when it had no body, and both souls didn't have any body, and they have done what they needed to do, they choose to merge, and they become one soul. So they're no longer two signatures. The two signature merges one signature. So now you're combining all the experiences. That soul now has all the experiences, all incarnations, and also in non-form states of both unifying as one, and it becomes one soul. So the two split become one. Now, what's been also happening the last quite a few years now is that there was an opening that occurred where the twin soul can actually merge with the soul that's being incarnated. So what happens is the soul may leave the body for a period of time, merging with that other soul. Now, of course, one of them can only embody. You're not going to have two embodiments and still be one soul. You may have the same signature, same level of communication, and so forth. So when one soul says, we're done, and I would like to merge, and the other one is ready to merge, because it does create a huge energetic shift, and it also can create a bit of a confusion, because now you will have memories from a soul perspective of many of lives that you may not had a reference point before, because, for example, there's your soul. Now, once merges your twin soul, you're now getting all the inputs of every incarnation, and also in non-form of your twin soul merging in yours, if you're embodied. So once that soul leaves and merges, it can come back into the same body at that point in time. So the body doesn't have to check out or anything like that, but it will have a unified soul. There's a small number of those already in existence. Go ahead.
Terry was just asking, when we call in our home soul frequency, are we tapping into our 24 super consciousness?
Yes. So let me clarify that. So when you're tapping into your home frequency, it's basically you're tapping into your soul's home frequency. Now, your soul, because it has had multiple lives on multiple dimensions and multiple physical forms, it has established certain frequencies that supersede what the range of frequency for planet Earth and the human form can or has expressed. So when you're tapping into that, you're accessing the highest frequency, the home frequency. That means the baseline frequency of your soul. Now, of course, you can't go fully, because then it actually influences in a big way your human experience, and it can put you in a kind of an altered state that is hard to relate with the body. So it doesn't become so beneficial to do that fully. But there's an awareness around that. So you're basically, when you're doing that, it goes to the maximum home frequency that your body can sustain. The same thing when you're activating your what you call source essence. You can go to the very maximum that the body can host. Of course, the body innate, as it continues to expand, can host higher and higher frequencies. Now, this is why you use your heart to open up and to beam that energy throughout your whole body. So that home frequency, you want it to go through completely your whole body. So it's going to influence, of course, it's going to negate more of the ego mind because it can't operate in that frequency, but it actually stimulates and upgrades the overall consciousness. It also creates a modification from the subconscious mind. It also creates an upgrade and modification in the body consciousness and also the human entity consciousness. That's why when you activate your home frequency to go throughout your whole body. Mind, of course the soul, of course your human entity, and your body. Now, when you're also tapping into your human, what we call your soul's home frequency, it will have access to the frequency that your soul, your twin soul, has available, to the degree it matches and supports you, but also your oversoul, which is the cluster of 24, or in this case, 23 souls. Unless you're already combined, then it's only 22 souls. Now, there have been very limited amounts of other souls that have been coming in and taking on a body, which already has the whole soul family or oversoul combined. Normally they're from other dimensions. Normally they're also from an advanced state to be able to do that. Of course, they still have to tune it down, and they can't have all the souls influence their experience, because that becomes a very interesting ride in itself. Because a lot of these souls have incarnated on different planets, which are a whole different higher play field and may not have same level of sensoria. For example, you take in a soul that comes from a higher dimension where it does not have the same reference point as in emotions or sensorially. We are very sensorially enriched. We have a very powerful connection to our sensorial experience. It actually influences how we experience ourselves in a body and how we learn from it. But we also have emotions. You have to understand, a lot of these beings or other embodiments, a lot of these souls have not had an enriching where they're sensorial, because a lot of them don't have very little sensoria, if any. And the sensorials are limited to very few, and the same thing with emotions. There's not that many planets that use emotions, that use a whole body sensorial acceleration or amplification. So, you don't end up using a lot of that. So what we're talking about, so you're now tapping into those frequencies, but it will tune to the point of that. The other part that's, of course, that's changing is your planetary consciousness. Now, your planetary consciousness is basically Gaia's evolution, Gaia's upgrading. And Gaia's upgrading from its own capacities, because Gaia was originally tuned to go all the way to 9th dimensional consciousness. Of course, now it could actually go up to 12. But it doesn't harness that. So basically, the Gaia is now solely focused on organic 3D and organic 5D, depending on the two frequency bands that you get onto the platforms of Gaia. But it also hosts 6 and 7. But it doesn't go further than that at this point. But a soul can play in the higher states, but the planet will not host it in a sense where it supports it completely, but you can bring it into the mix. So the planetary consciousness is upgrading. Plants are upgrading. Now, plants and animals are upgrading too. So they're also receiving light codes from the sun. They're also receiving codes and frequencies from Gaia itself. So it's upgrading. Our food supply is upgrading. Now, of course, the dwarfing, the manipulation of that, let's call it that loosely, has been emphasized much more to put these chemical derivatives and other influential codes to take its upgraded frequencies and only be able to use very little or create counterpart or what we call opposing frequencies and so forth. This is why when you're eating natural, organic, and when you're eating it live food, then it carries that frequency of the sun much more purely, and then the body can simulate it more, and it can help it shift its crystalline transformation that it's going through. So the planetary consciousness is upgrading, also all the stuff that's connected to the planetary consciousness, and all of it is influencing us. Our souls is accessing more of our true frequencies that it has adopted and utilized from various different incarnations. Our soul family is contributing even further right now, including your what you call your twin soul. The sun consciousness is expanding, and its frequency soul codes are there. Your human entity is utilizing all of that, and it's also increasing. The body is increasing. The spectrum of light and codes that are coming in from the center of the earth is coming to the surface, and we're usually the transmitter receiver. So a lot of us will start to, or have been for a while, receiving more of those codes, but it's also influencing. And this is fifth dimensional organic. So that's right, organic. But this is also upgrading itself too. I keep writing on myself here. So this keeps upgrading itself too. So that's also coming through. So you're seeing that all of that, and this is changing the overall consciousness, which basically shifts the way we shape our life. Now, what's key to understand here, what's important to understand, is that all changes start within us. So all of this is happening to us. Or we're doing it, we've collaborated with it, and we're choosing to collaborate in a very powerful way. Because as we're all experiencing all of this upgrade, we are now upgrading the collective consciousness, which collective consciousness is being influenced by all of the stuff that's going on, plus each and every one of us. So you're going to find right now that a lot of things that were created from the inverted matrix, inverted 3D and 2D, are being destabilized because the collective consciousness is increasing, and collective consciousness holds a certain frequency, and the collective consciousness also has a certain operating way or response and so forth that is not supporting what was originally the old stuff that we created. Cluster consciousness is also being shaped and changed too. So you'll notice a lot of the cluster consciousness are going through a transformation. So if you back to the original example I gave in religion, the religion is changing too. As much as they're trying to keep it closed as much as possible, it's breaking out on the seams because those cluster consciousness are very old clusters. Because you have to understand a lot of these cluster consciousness were created in very low frequencies. And very low states of awareness and very much in depth in the inverted matrix and inverted 3D, 2D state. Go ahead.
You wanted me to remind you about the percentage of what we are creating.
Yeah, forget that. We're not going to talk about it anymore. Thank you for that. I'm just kidding. Okay, yeah. So, as part of the changes I'm talking about, is that what we're doing also now is we're shifting the influential access point of our overall consciousness. The shifting is a higher and higher percentage has been shifted to the superconscious. So that means what we are creating, the more we align, the more what we're creating as a way of life is using this level of consciousness. So it's increased tremendously, because before the main focus, about 80+%, was governed by the ego, utilizing also the subconscious mind and utilizing the collective consciousness. You know how we talk about the laws of attraction, all of that stuff. Yeah, and it plays somewhat of a role. But the thing is, most of the time when we were creating things, what's happening is the ego is involved. I want this, I want that, wherever it is. And it supersedes a lot of things, and it goes into the subconscious mind eventually, but really it's focusing on the collective consciousness. And of course the collective consciousness also has the cluster consciousness. That means if somebody has a nice red sports car, I want one of those. And somebody has a nice big house, I want one of those. And they have nice clothes, I want one of those. And then the association was that if I have those things, I will be happy. If I have those things, I have arrived. If I have those things, I am successful. If I have those things, then I can be myself. If I have those things, I can now govern and take charge of other people's lives. Just as an example. So that's what the ego did. It was a major distraction, a major low state of experiencing. And then, of course, it would use the subconscious mind as resources to create the stories around that. And of course, the subconscious mind, the ego doesn't work one-sided here. So the ego is taking the collective consciousness, dumping it in, taking what your experiences and all the labels and so forth, bringing it in, and it's creating a scenario, creating a story, creating an experience, and then dumping it back into the subconscious mind to give it much more reference of whatever that was created. So the subconscious mind. So if you look at the laws of attraction, when The Secret came out and everything else, and it was really focusing on the consciousness. It was like, yeah, focus on your thoughts, focus on your experiences, focus on what you really want. Now, again, the wanting part a lot of times referred to what the ego's idea of want, which was from the collective, from clusters, from whatever it may have been. So the focus was concentrate on what you want and be focusing on that. Not what you don't want, but what you want. And there was a lot of focus on, creating from that conscious part. But if you looked at what they wanted, most of the time was very inverted 3D, 2D, and inverted matrix type of creation, because the ego is really the main driver. Okay? Then they realized that it didn't quite work so well. So now then they introduced what we call the subconscious mind. Because again, you can say from an ego perspective, I deserve that red car, for example, or sports car. I'm just giving you an example here. I want that sports car. I want the sports car. I want the sports car. You put labels everywhere. You put a board, and you write it down, whatever you want. A board like this or whatever. But then you couldn't forget about this, because the subconscious mind, has beliefs and labels. And there may be stories in there that says you don't deserve it, you weren't a good person, oh, look at what you did, or you came through a particular family that, are not able to accomplish those things and so forth. So now you have to look at the subconscious mind, because there's a story, a label, a definition around that. But that didn't make that much of an impact. It did. It was more powerful than what your thoughts were, what your belief was. Because the subconscious mind is your belief. You believe. Your beliefs are stored in your subconscious mind. That's where your beliefs come from. This is why beliefs are flexible. This is why beliefs come and go. Because it's just a memory with a label and a definition. I believe this is it. This is true. Of course, you're going to build a lot of different scenarios to prove your belief. But eventually that changes. So your ego was using what the subconscious mind is. However, and it was changing your thoughts and whatever else and whatever it is. What was I going to say?
You were talking about how law of attraction was
Right.
being run by ego.
Okay, so the ego is using this law of attraction sort of thing. Now the law of attraction doesn't exist. Okay, so matching frequencies will come. But the thing is, the matching frequencies is not just reflective of what state that you're in. It's what you need to experience. So it's not so much the mirror per se, like you say. Some of it is the case of the mirror. Some other cases is that mirror reflection is necessary to create a different experience. We'll play with that on another episode. But at this point, when we're looking at the overall consciousness, so the ego itself basically altered the story using the subconscious mind, and then realizing, wait a minute, well, why are we not manifesting what we want? What happened is there's been a shift, and that means the superconsciousness took the driver's seat more, even though it doesn't seem that way most of the time, because it looks like you're driven by the ego mind. The superconscious, your soul, is quite clever, and it's being supported by all of this infrastructure, And it's saying, wait a minute here. We came here to advance. We came here to create a change. We came here to experience really much more upgraded experience than what has been played out on planet Earth. So what are we going to do? We're going to use what we have at our disposal to bring to the surface what was once constructed as an idea, adopted in any way, shape, or form, or belief, or story, so that we can actually see it, how it functions, and how it influences our experience, and then go through the process of getting rid of it. So you want your red car, okay? So your ego says, I want the red car, I want the big house, I want the furs, I want the money, I want this, I want that. Your subconscious mind says, you don't deserve it, whatever it is. But if you play enough of it, you can get to the point where you believe it. Yeah, I deserve all of that nice stuff. Now, your superconscious will say, okay, if we get you the red car, the big house, the money, the furs, whatever, I'm just giving you examples here. Is it going to be a major distraction, or is it going to be an opportunity to show you that, hey, there's no sustenance in that? You can only be happy for a short period of time. Because you have to understand, happiness is an illusion. It was created by the ego. It was created by the inverted matrix. Happy, sad, polarized. Happy, sad, polarized. That's what you're looking at. Both are constructs and both require a story behind it. Have you ever noticed that you can be happy and then sad? Somebody says something really nice and you're happy. You get something, you're happy. But then later on, the happiness starts to dwindle. But something else happens and you may be sad. You may be, so-so. Why? Because it's a polarization. When we're talking about our true nature, which is joy, we have joy no matter what plays out. We're enjoying. Enjoying. You enjoy, or what you call it, you enjoy the experience, whatever it may be, without a label, right, wrong, good, bad, what's acceptable, not acceptable, and any of that stuff. Because that joy is our natural state. Happiness is not. So, anyways, the superconscious, your soul says, hey, wait a minute here. If we get you the red car, is it going to be a distraction? Or is it going to bring certain parts, like I was saying? It's going to show you that it's not sustainable. It's not going to give you so-called, what's the word? Fulfillment. It's not going to be fulfilling. It may be fulfilling for a short period of time, but what happens is, I've seen it many, many times. There are people that have wealth, that have toys, that have a lot of things that they want, but they're not experiencing a life they can feel comfortable with because the ego keeps finding reasons why they need to have more or why they need to be unhappy because they're not. And then the thing is, it's not sustainable because all the other parts don't match it. Because a lot of times you're creating a life stream that does not carry higher vibration, higher consciousness, higher awareness. It's still devoid from your sourceness, even though it's part of sourceness because it can't be outside of part of sourceness, but it's not matching your state of sourceness. So the superconscious say, okay, you can have it, and then you're going to experience that you're not going to find the joy. In other cases, it says no, because for you to have it, it's going to change certain things, and that's not what we're going to utilize. So you don't get it. This is the reason that a lot of people can't not manifest, because it becomes a major distraction. Now you can get part of it and maybe not all of it. So the point is, the soul uses that as opportunity to give you an opportunity to be able to clear out what no longer serves, which is again all of the inverted matrix stuff, the ego and the what you call inverted 3D, 2D, and all the associated stories, labels, programs, belief systems, and so forth that were created through that scenario. Because the more you clear out all of that and let go of all of that, then not only are you accessing more of that higher frequency, you're accessing more of the higher frequency of the human entity, the higher frequency of the body, you're accessing more of the higher frequency of the sun, you're accessing more of the higher frequency of the planet and all the animal kingdom and so forth. You're accessing more of what your oversoul and so forth coming into play. So you can see, and you're accessing more of what is coming in from the inner earth. And that reshapes your life completely, redirects you. Now, many of you have already experienced a lot of those changes within yourself. What do I mean by that? Some of the things that were really, really important to you at one point in time may not be so important now or have been completely abandoned. There are people that wanted lots of stuff, for example, and then they found they had that experience, whatever it is, and then they decided that in one way or another they wanted to live more simply, not to carry the burden of all that stuff, because they noticed that the true sustenance for them was connection with themselves, connections with others, connecting with nature, and so forth. That doesn't mean they don't have any stuff, but they're not going to put the focus on that, and they may get much less. So, and also simplify, because you have to understand, the more you have to upkeep, more you have to put your focus on to keep it intact. And you get more distracted because now your focus is distracted more. So that's how the shift is happening. So the ratio of the influence of your soul, your higher self, this is why more of us are tuning into our heart, is assisting us to be directive of how we construct our overall consciousness. Okay? And as your overall consciousness shifts, your reality shifts. What you see, what you engage with, who you play with, all of that, the importance, how you choose to engage in any part of it starts to shift. And that's what we're going through right now. And I know we started some time ago, but everything is accelerating in a very powerful way. Everything is moving a lot quicker than before. So the shift has been through the superconscious part. Now the collective consciousness, again, the collective consciousness is like a sponge now. It's always been like a sponge, but it's more of a sponge. But it's a very selective sponge. And what do I mean by that? It only accepts much more. So the ratio of acceptance of higher vibration consciousness is what it allows to flow very freely. The stuff of lower consciousness, very polarized, it's like a trickle now, where it wasn't the case before. So the shift from what it allows to come in and influence the collective consciousness is more of the high vibrational, higher encodements, more awareness. This is why the world is shifting, because the collective consciousness is a co-creation component of what we see as the collective playground. Now, of course, what we see personally is our own, and then, of course, we will collaborate with others to create clusters. So the cluster doesn't dissolve in the sense the older clusters dissolve, we create new clusters. And these new clusters are really high vibration. That doesn't mean you're not going to make another religion. No, you make another group that may create a community that is experiencing certain things in a collaborative way, and, you know, creates that cluster. So the cluster consciousness will still exist. It will be a different cluster consciousness. And then, of course, that will be connected to, of course, the overall collective consciousness, and that each cluster will influence. Now, individually influence, but also the clusters will influence. The beauty of the clusters is that you're bringing more and more people together, more of human entities coming together, more body consciousnesses coming together, more human, souls coming together, and more of their overall consciousness coming together, and creating a beautiful community of that matching vibration, which when you're bringing like-minded people, like they label it, a similar vibration or in the same range, and you create a cluster there, it becomes even much more impactful when it comes to making a change in the collective consciousness, what we call the main collective consciousness. So this is one of the reasons like-minded people like to get together, because first of all, it supports each other and allows them to expand within themselves, but they're also creating a much more powerful. You've probably heard where you have two or more people, that it actually becomes even more powerful, because you're unifying those energies, but you're bringing in different consciousness and so forth. So what you're creating is smaller clusters, but as more people join, the clusters become much more powerful. Go ahead.
Doris is asking, Franco, do you see our collective consciousness on track based on what you saw years ago, or are we ahead of schedule or behind?
Okay, from the way it was before, we're behind, have been behind. Now, the movement that we're making right now, the amount of changes in the collective was never scheduled. Not the speed. It was going to be much more, I would say gradual, but not really gradual. It was accelerated speed, but not as fast paced as we are going through now, and not as intensified as we are going through now. Because of the fact of a lot of the things that were going to come into place in 2012, or the end of 2012 going into 2013, was kind of laid out but not fully executed, we did fall behind. So a few things have been delayed. But now we're on a catch-up sort of thing. So everything is accelerated. So we're trying to make up time. And when I say make up time, I'm using the words loosely. We're trying to make up for where we haven't gone. So we're making a huge progress. By 2017, going into 2020, we were really intending to be in a very different state of consciousness. A lot of the stuff that we're experiencing now would not have been still in place. However, because of the allowances that were made, and those allowances at that point in time, how can I say, were to compensate for people not ready and still wanting to experience of that and so forth. So the end of 2018 going into 2019, I remember the phrase, ready or not. I remember the beings that I was working with and everything else that we were looking at. Ready or not, we're going forward. We're not delaying anything anymore. So 2019 was a very powerful year because there was a lot of changes that took place around that, including the creating of two platforms, the organic 3D and organic 5D overlaying on planet Earth, or on Gaia, as you call it, so forth. Then later on in the year, removing completely the inverted matrix, the inverted 3D, 2D support system, shutting down the moon, and so forth. That came into place. And then, of course, we stepped into 2020, where now everything is playing out in a very exaggerated and very powerful way. Now, to prepare us for all this, 2019, we had tremendous amount of bursts of energy. Now in 2020, we are getting them almost back to back. It's almost like you can't even say, oh, this is the next wave, because it's like one wave after another, and some are overlaying waves. So that means one's not even finished and a new one came in. All of these waves are all specific. All of these waves ignite, turn on, create certain changes. It creates changes in our body, it creates changes in our operating system, it creates changes in the energy that we emit and play with. It creates changes on the planet, what we're talking about Gaia. It creates changes within all the animals, all the sentient beings on the planet and so forth, including animals and so forth. They're all part of the sentient beings. And plant life, so everything is changing every part of it. And it's also destabilizing more and more of the old construct. Also, some of the changes were that they were going to remove some of the hybrids. So a lot of the aliens, so-called, that were playing the Luciferian operating system have been removed. They're no longer there. So the only thing that was left was the hybrids, which are human hybrids, which are half the human hybrid, like we are all human hybrids, or the humans made up of hybrids, which we're going to get into an episode of that at some point. So the human hybrids, but with that other, what you call draconian and Anunnaki hybrid combined, part of it that carry the Lucifer operating system. So those are existing, but a lot of them are being unplugged, especially the really high-end ones have been taken out of the equation right now. There is still more. Sometimes people call it, draining the swamp and all that stuff. But that's why you're noticing a lot of this pedophile and all of that stuff, because a lot of those constructs were put in place to support those hybrids, because those hybrids needed really low vibration states, meaning tremendous amount of fear. And that's why the world has been plagued with the propaganda and focus on fear, survival, because those are very low frequencies. anger, judgment, hatred. This is why enemies were created. They're all illusionary in a sense. It's like, okay, they're our enemy. They're this, and certain individuals were programmed to play out what we call so-called enemies and so forth. So a lot of that has been altered and changed. So as these waves are coming in, they're also putting those things out of the equation and stimulating more of that. So again, there's still a lot of bodies on the planet here that are extras, that are playing various roles for active souls, but there's a lot of souls that are still very active in purging out a lot of the old inverted matrix construct within themselves, which is supported by the ego, of course, the inverted 3D and 2D programming. Because like I said, I'm just going to refresh you, the subconscious mind, you have to understand, carries pretty well all of its experiences, all of its memories, all the labels, all the definitions. When the inverted matrix, the inverted 3D and 2D was fully active, and those labels were all created from the ego. And the ego is an operating system that was applied when these hybrids were put in place and when the modification went. We went from organic matrix to an inverted matrix. So we had the organic, but we put another one in between. And I know I explained this before. I'm just giving you a refresher. I put an inverted matrix in there, and then we were already operating from an organic 3D with the potentiality, not only the potentiality, it was encoded for us to go from organic 3D to 4D, 5D, 6D, up to 9D. So the planet itself was designed to be able to do that. Everything on the planet, including Gaia, was all tuned for that. So when the modification came into place and the operating system of the ego was put in, which is pure software, which has receptors that take in information from the streamings that were put in. So for us to have that experience, for example, so when the modification was done, the inverted matrix was put in, the inverted matrix could not operate very well. And we could not create an inverted 3D, 2D experience unless we had a modification that occurred to the physicality. Of course, the physicality had a lot of its DNAs turned off because of the DNAs would continue receiving consciousness from the species that made up that, because a DNA is a transmitter receiver. That's why it has telomeres. This is why it has codes, and those codes, that operating system and so forth, actually create the human experience. And it's a self-evolving human experience. This is the reason that we have 12 different species that are actually, for the main operating system, is made of that, because it kept kept receiving information, encodements, and so forth, and consciousness to be able to go from organic 3D, 4D, 5D, and beyond. Now, for humanity to be stifled from that, it was presented as an opportunity to have a challenge. That's when the ego was put into place, which was a software that would override. So first the DNAs get turned off, then the body went through a transformation from crystal to what we call carbon-based, which basically carbon holds less frequencies, less spectrum of light, and so forth, where crystals doesn't. Crystals, as you can notice, crystals can be tuned very easily. Carbon is not easily tuned. So it was able to tune, so that's basically the way that the cells work and what they use as a reference point as the energy is coming through. And then the ego was put into place to actually project the reverse. So the inverted matrix was presenting what it was presenting, and the ego would take that as an operating system and create stories that was all inverted. So everything was backwards. And that's through the ego and the influence of the inverted matrix. That's how we created the inverted 3D. So we went from organic 3D to inverted 3D to 2D. Now, not everybody went to 2D, but a majority had a chance to do so. But a lot of it. So when we were talking about people evolving from 3D to 5D, they're not really referring to organic 3D. They're really referring to inverted 3D, going into organic 3D and organic 5D. So the changes that we've gone through is basically from 2D inverted 3D to organic 3D and 5D, which was the two offerings that were in place. Originally, those offerings were not to be in place, because when it was decided as a cluster or a collective to upgrade in a very powerful way. It was going to go from organic, what we call inverted 3D and 2D, from inverted matrix to organic matrix to 5D. However, many of the souls were not ready, and many of the bodies wanted to go through some of those experiences and wanted to experience the organic 3D, so that's why the two platforms were put in place. So now we're accelerating super, super fast, and we're moving in such speeds, and a lot of the destabilizing. Now, we have to understand there's two levels of observing destabilization happening. One is our mind, because that's a lot of it is changing, so our consciousness, our world is crumbling within ourselves. What we refer to as who we are is changing very powerfully because it's falling apart and it's now looking for itself. This is why the question started coming up for several years now, but much more now. Who am I? Because first we thought it was a body with a certain life stream and saying, I am this characteristic, I am this in life endeavor, I am this role player or whatever it is, and now going to the point where that doesn't resonate anymore because of those changes that are occurring within ourselves, and now you're looking at saying, who am I? Because now it's to refer that you are back to consciousness awareness, an access point of sourceness, having a human experience or source essence or being essence or soul, and all the other different layers of souls and expressions coming into and saying, okay, this is what we're doing. So yes, we're moving a lot quicker. We are still somewhat behind of where we wanted to be. However, we're making, what do they call it? Making ground, making way, making progress. So the next 3 years, which are already half of the year went through, it's going to be quite accelerated, very intensified. But we're kind of ready for it. So, hey, it's going to happen. Go ahead.
Annie was asking if it sounds like the superconsciousness can allow or disallow experiences based on whether or not they align with the higher purpose for one's life. Where does one's free will come in?
Well, there's several free wills. Okay? This is a good one because you're talking about the soul utilizing its free will. We're all one here. All of this is made up as one. So the free will, are you saying my ego's free will? Am I talking about the body's free will? Am I talking about the human entity's free will? The subconscious mind doesn't have a free will. Realistically, it just has memory and stored information or archives or what do you call a cache case? Cache kits. I'm trying to make a new word here. A cache kits of their human experience. And then you have free will of your soul, higher self. So which one are we talking about? All of it have free will. Okay? Now, where we feel that we have no free will is the illusion that the soul, the ego likes to present. It likes to present. You don't have free will. You want that, but you're not getting it. Right? But meanwhile, you are exercising free will because, first of all, you're never, ever, ever going to have an experience that you, in one way or another, do not choose to have. You will not engage with anyone unless you choose. Now the point comes to, what are we choosing? We're choosing from, most of it is being chosen now, more than ever, from a superconscious level. But that choice is also engaging the human entity, it's engaging the body consciousness, and then it's being utilized as the overall. So it's reducing the ego consciousness access much more. So, we have free will. We've always had free will. We're source. Okay? We're just creating different fragmentations and ideas that we don't. Because if your soul gets its way, you're just saying, hey, I don't have any free will because I didn't get what I wanted. Okay? Now, the ego is not, your super conscious or your soul is not going to say, I didn't have free choice. I allowed it or I didn't allow it. Your overall consciousness may turn around and play with that to some degree because it says, hey, wait a minute, I thought we were all working together to create this. So I hopefully that understand and makes sense. Does it make sense to you? I mean, you're the brain behind this. How does it feel, free will, to you as
Free will,
Kimberly Ross?
yes, it. Because the soul is the guidance. The soul is the guidance, and so we may misinterpret the voices in our head as our soul. And so sometimes it may seem like we're not giving our soul free will, or it's not getting it, when it's really the ego. So the ultimate goal is for expansion and growth. And so that's your soul's directive, so to speak. And so it's going to direct you a certain way. It's not, but you can choose on another level to go that direction or not go that direction. So that, to me, is where the free will comes in as well. That's how I see it.
So look at it this way. The body is Gaia. Our body is an extension of Gaia. There's a specific signature, a specific frequency. So it's Gaia. It has the option, the free will, that it incarnates. Or it takes on what looks like an individualized expression. We're talking about an extension of a holographic expression. So it chooses, yes, I want to be a holographic expression in a physical form, male, female, whatever it may be. Okay? And it takes on encodements from the different source points, meaning your parents and lineage and so forth. So the body has free will. It says, okay, Gaia's expression, I want to come in a form. Human entity is already a collective human entity. And it says, hey, I want a body. I'd like to express an experience within a body and learn from that. So it exercises its free will to connect with a body. And voila, you've got a connection. Your soul, your superconscious, has free will. And it says, hey, I want to take on a human entity and a body to express my sourceness in this operating system on this planetary playground, Earth. Okay? So it chooses all of that. Your overall consciousness is made up of all of this. It's the body consciousness, it's a human entity consciousness, your super consciousness, and it's also made up of what it receives from the collective consciousness, what it gets from the sun's consciousness, and all these other sources. And of course, the superconscious, it doesn't exist pretty well, very minimal before birth, because it kind of creates a baseline for us to get started with. To have some reference point, very minuscule, and then it grows because it records your experiences. When we're talking about regressions and stuff like that, when people are doing regression, you're either regressing the soul or you're regressing the human entity, but a lot of times you can also regress the body. But a lot of times the body would just see itself in another body or something of that nature. But usually that's not so impactful because even though that is the case, I have done very few of those. Most of the time it's the soul and their human entity that has it. Now, of course, the human entity has records of being human each and every time. Male, female, different cultures, different parts of the world, or whatever it is. And that's what it specializes in. The human entity also brings its consciousness, within its consciousness, also certain skill sets. So this is why a lot of people come in already skilled with certain skill sets. They can play music, they can do art, they can be engineering, they can be designers, they can be whatever, without going through the whole process of learning. Now, of course, we still go through the learning process, but, these savants and so forth that come in and all of a sudden they never took a day of lesson, they can pick up an instrument and play music, or that they have such a powerful scientific background, or have such a powerful awareness of how nature works and whatever else, or they have their very powerful connection to how Gaia works and all nature and so forth. That's all coming from the experiences it had from all the embodiments and so forth. And it chooses, because when the free choice comes in, free will of the human entity, it also selects what it wants to bring with it. It can bring in certain skill sets and not others. It taps in and brings whatever it is. The body consciousness, of course, brings the highest level of its expression itself, and the soul will come in and bring in whatever dimensional experiences it may have had and utilizes. Now, of course, when we're talking about crystal children, we're talking about indigo children, we're talking about star seeds, we're talking about rainbow kids and so forth. These are all tuned souls that are coming in. So, each one plays a role, especially now, because they weren't so prevalent before. But, the indigos were the very first ones that started to come in. And then, of course, we started having the rainbows and then the crystals. And then, of course, we had an influx of star seeds. And again, these are souls that never had a human experience, but also come much more prepared. Now, you have to understand, each and every soul communicates with the human entity and the body, and also the soul family. And I'm not talking about this soul family. I'm talking about family that is coming through the live stream. Life stream. So meaning that it talks to your parents, it talks to the lineage of your parents, and so forth, to see if it's all copacetic to work together, to come into, and then we'll also check into what roles they have to play at this point. I think I've overwhelmed everybody at this point.
Yeah, I think that was good for today. That was a lot of information. I think this one will have to be listened to more than once. I may have to listen to it again as well. So.
Okay. So anyways, that's how the different levels of consciousness direct our life. The thing that we need to understand is there's a shifting going on, the focus, and the one stepping into the driver's seat. And when we're talking about the driver's seat, is the more influential part of directing our life has shifted roles, less and less of the ego, less and less of what has been created from the different set points, but also being more of the soul and more of the most highest upgrade of the human entity and the highest upgrade of the body consciousness. You have to understand, the bodies have been encoded to express and experience itself in this new world. And we are what we call a new world. The world is the same. What's changed is the upgrading of this operating system, the way it functions, and also what it supports. So there's a new you, a higher upgraded version of you coming through to play on this new world. So that's what we're experiencing at this point in time. So now you have an idea of how consciousness, the different levels of consciousness, actually play a role in shaping and directing your life. Did you want to say something?
Only about next week. Next week's Advancing Consciousness series.
The episode. The next episode?
Yeah, it's not going to be on Tuesday next week. It's going to be on Friday.
Yes.
Same time, same channel, but
Yes.
Friday.
So next week, instead of being Tuesday, it will be Friday. So it'll be a bigger span of time between this one and the next one. We have a few things that we are planning to do, so we won't be available to live stream. So in essence, it'll give you some more time to catch up and also to integrate with all of this information that I shared. Now, what I suggest, the series itself, each and every episode and the different parts of the episodes, all stimulate, activate within you a level of knowing that may have been somewhat dormant or has been covered up with what a lot of the stories and so forth that have been from the ego perspective. Each time you're exposing yourself, don't think, okay, I watched all of this and now, I'm there. You're going to notice if you go back to some of the other ones, you will understand more. You'll actually even get more information. Why? Because you're more prepared for it. And you're able to access, like what we talked about here. This is a lot of information. You probably can't utilize all of it right now. But you're exposing yourself to it again, more of it will come into place. More alignments will come into place. I share this information to stimulate what you know inside of you. And that stimulation is actually allowing you to upgrade, to go into your natural state more, and then be an even more powerful contributor to your own upgraded experience, but the collective upgraded experience. We want this new world, and it's coming through us. Each one of us are going to shape this new world. It's not outside of us. We've had support, we've had an influx of energies, but those again are still coming through us. Yes, it's upgrading certain parts of it, but at the same time it's not there to come and say, okay, beam you up to another planet and make those changes. As much as that was a possibility, a high probability at one point in time, it is not what is the master plan any longer, because the master plan has upgraded. So that being the case, we're really, we're stepping into a main role for ourselves in a very powerful way, to be the constructor of our new world, or to utilize it, but also to create all the different experiences that we can experience here, but it's all through us. So the key here right now is just to keep igniting this awareness within you. The more you ignite, the more you're as an observer, the more you experience what you experience, the more you purge, and I like the word purgate, purge is it? I don't know, can't say it now. See, it comes out sometime. You purge more of your old self, the older versions of yourself. You're purging the stories, labels, and so forth. You're upgrading how you experience it, and the more you disconnect from the ego operating system, and eventually it shuts down completely. Last thing I want to say, don't demonize the ego. Don't demonize the inverted matrix, the inverted 3D, 2D. It was an experience, a powerful one, a highly beneficial one, because in a way we couldn't have the experience we had, but an obsolescence came up some time ago, and now we're finally exercising the upgrade, because playing that inverted matrix, inverted 3D, 2D, and through the ego operating system, we kind of fell behind on the advancement of our solar system and the advancement of our galaxy. So that's why this super acceleration that we're experiencing. There was one other thing I wanted to link to that. Of course, I'm going to remember afterwards. But I thought it was important, but I guess it's not that important, because I don't remember it. See, I get it streamed through my soul, but then it kind of, if I don't jump on it, it just passes on and more stuff comes up. Wow, that's cool.
You're talking about demonizing.
Yeah, not to demonize the ego, and we got to look at the world as a a beautiful ride that we went through. So looking at even the changes that we're going through right now is to accept that as part of the journey. I mean, this is exciting. You're all here for that reason. You're all here for this transformation. That's the only reason you're here. You knew that this was going to take place, and you wanted to partake. You didn't want to be left and say, hey, I missed out on that opportunity. Well, this is one of a lifetime, if you want to call it that, as opportunity. So I wouldn't be in such a hurry to leave, in a sense, because the ego is going to make it seem like it sucks, that it's a bad thing. All that's happening right now is horrible, demonizing every part of whatever's playing out. See, the ego is very good because it likes to use the other part of it, and that is, as things come to light, it takes on that other part and says, hey, I want to play the blame game, that's the word, and say, well, we blame it all those horrible people that were there. Well, you have to understand, they're just playing a role the same way you're playing a role. We've all had opportunities to play what we would consider horrible roles, but as from a perspective of judgment and from the ego's perspective, but a role is a role, an experience is an experience. It's neutral. As source, everything is an experience, everything is an opportunity. So thank you again for bringing this all together, for participating, playing together, bringing this to the point where you are engaging. And one thing I wanted to say is that this, I remembered now.
Okay, good.
Okay, then we'll wrap it up. What I remember right now, all of this that's going on is that, we're going to be creating a cluster consciousness that is going to bring like-minded people together, which, by absorbing all of that, this is going on and allowing these changes to happen within you, which is in alignment with yourself, then we're planning to put clusters, groups together in a sense where, even if we're doing it just online, where we will start to work collaboratively to kind of project this new so-called way of life. But again, we need to be clearing out a lot of this stuff. So that's going to happen down the road. Could be later this year. That's the intent, but we'll see how that goes. So thank you again for participating. Thank you for your support. We're always welcoming support to help us to put more of this content out. And I know I've been delaying with the podcast. We're so close, but I'm not even going to throw a date on it. We're working diligently to get there. So once we get launched, it's going to be launched, and we're going to keep it rolling. So it'd be well worth the wait in a sense. But right now, immerse yourself in all the content that's already out there, that's on the different platforms at this point. So enjoy that part. So go out and have a blast. We'll see you next Thursday, 4 p.m. Friday, next Friday. Not this coming Friday, the following Friday, where we will get together and we'll play with another episode. We'll see what we're going to play with next. Thank you again.